The chair recognizes the gentleman from Maine.
Thank you. I yield myself as much time as I may consume, and I rise to offer my amendment to H.R. 3305. It's frequently said that working men and women feel left out by their government's decision-making process. Too often in Washington, those with the greatest financial means can get the closest to the political, governmental, and regulatory process, and therefore be better able to influence it. Just as bad is that in this gridlocked political machine, what little action that does take place often takes the path of least resistance. So when a species of whale is at risk of extinction for a whole slew of complex reasons, whether it be the overfishing that took place more than a century ago, climate change and warming waters that wreak havoc upon a whale's habitat, seismic air gun testing for oil and natural gas, deadly ship strikes by a large shipping industry, or the risk of entanglement in a lobsterman's fishing gear, who and to what degree does Washington regulate each? And who has a seat at the table to ensure that the process behind such decisions is fair and equitable? Do we believe that a small group of fishermen in Maine have as strong a place at the table as does the fossil fuel or shipping industry, or the governmental affairs director with a K Street office in Washington? I don't think so. And so NOAA, facing the threat of lawsuits, has rushed ahead using a decision support tool that was developed for the purpose of reducing ship strikes by the Navy, and fed that tool with old data and hasty assumptions, and have come forward to require Maine lobstermen to achieve a 60% risk reduction in their fishery. What assumptions, you might ask? Maine's Department of Marine Resources argues the tool is flawed because areas with a lot of fishing gear but few whales are labeled high risk, and areas with a lot of whales and less fishing gear are considered low risk. This scientific tool uses outdated habitat data from the mid-Atlantic, which is far away and different than the Gulf of Maine. When attributing responsibility for injury or death of a whale to fishing gear of an unknown origin, NOAA assumes an equal distribution between U.S. and Canadian gear, despite strong, recent scientific and empirical evidence to the contrary. And the data used do not accurately reflect a distribution shift of right whales since the year 2010. Recent studies have established firm links between warming waters in the Gulf of Maine and a 90% reduction of the plankton that right whales eat, calling into question whether the whales have stopped visiting the warming plankton-depleted waters of eastern Maine entirely, which would greatly reduce the likelihood that any whale be entangled in Maine lobstermen's gear. It's reasonable to ask NOAA to allow its decision tool to undergo a peer review process before enforcing punitive regulations upon Maine fishermen. Maine's Commissioner of the Department of Marine Resources has said that peer-reviewed science is the cornerstone of the decision-making process. Apparently not in this case. This amendment would require NOAA to use relevant data and an effective tool to ensure that its regulations target areas of high risk and yield the most effective conservation benefits possible to protect the right whale without unfairly burdening Maine lobstermen. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.